失せろ。
Shanks alongside Dragon is one of the most built-up and least seen characters in One Piece. He looks cool, is strong, and is shrouded in mystery, but he also may be the most structurally important. The manga does not build him like a conventional mentor. It builds him like a hidden support beam, a figure whose rare appearances repeatedly redirect the story's momentum, moral emphasis, and historical scale. My impression of Shanks is therefore not that he is the strongest man alive, or the greatest mystery in the series, but that he is the axis through which the old era hands itself to the new. And that impression only becomes more persuasive after the recent Figureland revelations. Shanks is now tied not just to Roger's inherited will, but to the bloodline of the Celestial Dragons and the Holy Knights, placing him at the point where pirate freedom and sacred tyranny collide. This does not merely make him more mysterious. It retroactively deepens every major silence around him, because the silence no longer reads as cool detachment alone. It reads as strategy, burden, and possibly a lifetime spent refusing the role the world expected him to play. Here is the thing nobody can agree on: whether Shanks is ultimately the story's guardian, its last gatekeeper, or both at once. But before that question can be answered, the larger truth has to be established. Shanks is not important because he appears often. He is important because every time he appears, the story itself changes direction. Shanks' story begins at the place where One Piece itself starts to look like forbidden scripture: God Valley. The God Valley flashback places Shanks and Shamrock at the center of that erased historical site, with Shanks then discovered as an infant in a treasure chest by the Roger pirates after the island's catastrophe. God Valley is not just another flashback location. It is one of the story's most aggressively suppressed historical nodes, tied to pirates, celestial dragons, slavery, Garling, and the hidden mechanisms by which the current world order maintained itself. So when Oda places baby Shanks there, the effect is pretty clear. Shanks is born not simply into history, but into the exact wound the series has been circling around for hundreds of chapters: an unnamed infant inside a treasure chest, found in the aftermath of an event the world would rather erase. He enters the story as holy blood literally boxed up and carried away by pirates. That is why the Figureland confirmation matters so much. It reveals that Shanks was not merely adjacent to the ruling class. He was born into one of the lines that define it. And yet the life that formed him was not Marie-Joie. It was Roger's ship. Now consider this: Shanks never really did reject privilege. He never lived inside it. The world of the Celestial Dragons lost him before it could shape him. That means his identity was not built through rebellion in the theatrical sense. It was built through belonging elsewhere. Roger's crew did not rescue a prince who would later denounce the kingdom. They raised a child who learned laughter, freedom, wandering, loyalty, and piracy before he could ever internalize the theology of divine rule. Shanks might be one of the most compelling characters in this story, because he inherited the possibility of everything and chose none of it, perhaps before he ever even knew what he was turning away from. That transforms the moral geometry of his character. He is not a fallen noble. He is a person who rejected to become a god, and became something unclassifiable. Roger's crew was the cradle of Shanks' identity. Roger matters here not just as a legendary pirate captain, but as the man who reauthored Shanks' place in the world. The boy who should, by birth, belong to the system that crowns itself above humanity, instead grows up serving under the man who laughed at the edge of history and reached the end of the Grand Line. Roger wore the straw hat, then Shanks wore it, and finally Luffy inherited it from Shanks. This means Shanks is not simply part of Roger's crew history. He is the designated bridge by which Roger's symbolic legacy survives into the next era. But why did Roger entrust the hat to Shanks specifically? What did he see in that child from God Valley that made him the keeper of a legacy larger than his own blood, and even his own crew? Roger, who had just reached Laugh Tale and read the true history of the world, who understood that Joy Boy needed a successor, who understood that maybe the human fruit model Nika needed to reach the right person at the right time. Chapter 968, which shows Roger returning from Laugh Tale and immediately speaking privately with Shanks about something we are not shown. That conversation has never been revealed. Whatever was said in it moved Shanks to tears. Roger, a dying man, was maybe simultaneously placing a different kind of burden on Shanks. Not the burden of the bloodline specifically, but the burden of being a bridge in between two eras. The Child of Destiny. Chapter 1152, set 14 years before the current timeline. Scopper Gaban and Shanks share a quiet, intimate scene. Bathing together, Shanks expresses his wish to form his own crew with Buggy. It is the wish of someone still trying to locate himself, still processing the enormity of what Roger handed him. And Gaban says, "You're the child of destiny. Let's not delve into complicated matters today." Now, what does this mean? Of course, I only know just as much as you do, but we can try to dissect this and try guessing. He is not announcing it like a prophecy. He says it the way you'd remind someone of something they already know, as if this title has been spoken before. in quiet conversations Roger had with his crew after Laugh Tale, in the language of people who have read the true history of the world and understand what role certain lives are meant to play in it. Importantly, the chapter also shows that at this point in the past, Shanks still bears the mark of the world government on his arm, an indication that he had returned to the Holy Land, had navigated the politics of his Figureland heritage, and had existed within the system long enough to carry its brand. The Child of Destiny is not someone untouched by the machine. He is someone who walked through it, let it mark him, and then walked out. The Roger pirates knew. They did not merely like Shanks. They understood him as a figure with a specific function in the arc of history, the one who would ensure that the liberating will of their captain survived into an age Roger himself could not enter. Oda planted the seed of Shanks in Fuchsia Village. What makes his introduction stick out for me, and what made Fuchsia Village a phenomenal introduction, is because it looks deceptively simple on the first read. It feels like a prologue, but structurally, it is one of the most important locations in the entire series, because it is where Shanks performs the acts that make Luffy legible as our protagonist. First, there is the hat. When Shanks places Roger's straw hat on Luffy, and tells him to return it once he becomes a great pirate, he is doing more than inspiring a child. He is naming the line of continuity between two eras, and appointing Luffy as the one who might carry it forward. Luffy's dream is deeply personal, but it is not self-generated in a vacuum. Shanks sees it, answers it, and gives it form. That matters because symbols in One Piece are rarely neutral. The straw hat means aspiration, inheritance, and permission at once. Roger gives it to Shanks. Shanks gives it to Luffy. So the hat is effectively the series' most elegant visual proof that Shanks is the relay between the old Pirate King's meaning and the future Pirate King's becoming. If the hat alone made Shanks important, he would already be central. But Oda layers something even more explosive onto Fuchsia Village: the fruit. Shanks had stolen the fruit from a government transport, and that fruit was later revealed to be the human fruit, Model Nika, the fruit the government had concealed under the name of the Gum Gum fruit for centuries. The most decisive piece of the final saga literally passed through Shanks' hands. Luffy's transformation into Nika does not emerge from random chance alone. It emerges from a chain of custody that includes the world government, Shanks, Fuchsia Village, and then Luffy himself. That is why Shanks cannot be treated as merely inspirational. He is materially implicated in our protagonist's existence, symbol, and power. Very few characters in fiction can claim all three. But here is something people really can't agree on. Did Shanks know what the fruit was? We know that Shanks possessed the fruit, and that the government considered it extraordinarily important. What remains unresolved is how much Shanks knew about its true identity at the exact time he had it, and whether he understood its relationship to Joy Boy, Nika, or the coming age. The strongest careful reading is that Shanks likely knew the fruit mattered beyond ordinary devil fruit value. His background, his ties to Roger's legacy, and the unusual significance later attached to the fruit all push in that direction. Oda generally prefers destiny to arrive through a partnership between inherited conditions and human spontaneity, so the best formulation is this. Shanks probably recognized importance before he knew outcome. He may have been carrying a key without knowing exactly which door it would open, and when Luffy ate the fruit, Shanks may have seen not a catastrophe but a convergence. Another question, did Shanks let Luffy eat it? Well, we don't know. The text does not specifically say Shanks wanted Luffy to eat the fruit, but the narrative arrangement around the scene has always felt suspiciously purposeful. The argument for intentionality is not that Shanks engineered every second of the event. It is that he brought the fruit into proximity with a child whose temperament, hunger for freedom, impossible stubbornness, and emotional radiance all made him the kind of person this story repeatedly marks as history-changing. Whether Shanks consciously allowed the event, subconsciously failed to prevent it, or instantly recognized its significance once it happened, does not matter. The fact of the matter is that Shanks becomes the human pivot through which the fruit reaches the only person who can awaken it in the way the story requires. Treating the Sea King scene as mere sentiment is completely wrong. Shanks gives up his arm to save Luffy, then dismisses the loss as a cheap price for the future. On its surface, it is an origin scene for Luffy, but at a structural level it is a declaration about Shanks himself. We know now that Shanks willingly sacrificed his arm to the Sea King, to break his covenant with God itself. A character of Shanks' caliber does not lose an arm in Chapter 1 unless the story wants the wound to remain meaningful for the rest of the series. That meaning is not just him freeing himself and saving Luffy. It is that Shanks has enough conviction to convert power into sacrifice without hesitation when the future is at stake, and freeing himself from the world order. Oda uses scarcity to enlarge Shanks. I mean, we see this with Dragon too. Most people would not trust themselves to write a character this important so sparsely. Shanks appears in surprisingly few truly decisive scenes over the first 1,000+ chapters. Shanks works because Oda understands that mystery is not the same thing as ignorance. The story keeps Shanks hidden because his appearances are not supposed to feel like information dumps. They are supposed to feel like pressure changes in the atmosphere. He is the only character in this story who can appear after long silence and immediately make the reader or watcher feel that the story is about to redefine its own priorities. Shanks brings direction into the story. Shanks is not absent in the meaningful sense, because the consequences of his decisions remain active even when he is off-panel. Luffy still wears the hat Shanks gave him. Luffy still has the fruit Shanks stole. The political balance of Marineford was reshaped by Shanks' intervention. The final saga's family and government tensions are now inseparable from Shanks' surname. So Shanks does not disappear between appearances. He persists as an unseen cause. This is why calling him merely a mentor misses the scale of the writing choice. Mentors usually deliver lessons. Shanks delivers conditions. The reason I say this is because the domino chain is too consistent to ignore. The cumulative case for Shanks as the series axis becomes hard to dismiss once everything is laid out plainly. Roger entrusts the straw hat to Shanks, placing him in the line of inherited meaning. Shanks gives the hat to Luffy, turning a village child into the bearer of the series' central symbol. Shanks steals and carries the fruit the government desperately wanted hidden, placing himself directly between state secrecy and future liberation. Luffy eats that fruit while in Shanks' orbit, making Shanks part of the origin of Nika's return. Shanks stops Kaido from reaching Marineford, preventing the war from escalating into something potentially unrecoverable. Then this man ended the Summit War, preserving survivors and ensuring the story can continue through Luffy's retreat. Shanks' family line later reveals direct ties to the same regime whose downfall the series is approaching, binding him to the hidden center of the world's power structure. I mean, any one of these events would justify major status. Everything put together makes Shanks feel less like a character moving through the world, but more like a regulator of when and how the world is allowed to change. The Kaido interception remains one of the most audacious withheld events in the series. Kaido was heading toward Marineford, and Shanks stopped him. Oda deliberately avoids showing the mechanics, and in my eyes, this says something important about how Oda writes Shanks. With many characters, the action is the point. With Shanks, the effect is often the point. The narrative does not need to show every blow exchanged, because what matters is that Kaido, one of the strongest figures in the story, did not arrive. This makes Shanks feel uniquely authoritative in a way that raw power rankings cannot fully describe. He is not just strong enough to survive contact with monsters. He is written as someone whose intervention can prevent the world from tipping into forms of chaos the story is not yet ready to process. Marineford is the purest example of his structural role. Marineford matters because it is where Shanks most clearly demonstrates that he governs transitions rather than victories. He does not arrive early to save Ace. He does not dominate the battlefield for spectacle. He enters at the exact moment when the war has produced its necessary tragedy and is about to become pointless annihilation. Then he ends it, simply by possessing the moral and political weight to declare that the war is over and have the world accept the declaration. Shanks is one of the only figures in this story whose arrival can force the narrative itself to say, "This war is over." He does not just interrupt battle. He imposes a boundary on history. Shanks is not merely a powerful pirate who once helped our main character. He is a character the story trusts to decide when catastrophe has reached the limit beyond which the plot would collapse into something unusable. And we have the meeting with the Five Elders. For years, one of the most widespread assumptions was that Shanks himself walked into Marijois and met the Five Elders. That reading had major consequences. It made Shanks look like a man with secret, unrestricted access to the highest chamber of power in the world. A pirate who could move through the sacred center of the government without visible resistance. The later reveal that the figure was Shamrock, not Shanks, fundamentally changes the meaning of that scene, and in many ways it makes the writing more interesting. Shamrock widens the story, instead of simplifying Shanks. If the old reading had remained true, Shanks risked becoming too totalizing a figure, too able to do everything everywhere. Shamrock prevents that. The meeting now reveals that another figureland brother exists inside Marijois, while Shanks' own relationship to the Holy Land very much remains more complicated and less directly open. This does two powerful things at once. First, it frees Shanks from becoming a solved mastermind, whose hidden influence already explains everything. Second, it reveals that Shanks' life cannot be reduced to Luffy alone, because he now has a brother, a bloodline conflict, and an unresolved family history that existed before Fuchsia Village ever entered the picture. Shamrock is not simply a plot twist character, he is the life Shanks did not live. It relocates Shanks' importance towards structural tension. He matters not because he can magically access every room anymore, but because he stands between family and chosen identity, and between the regime and the era trying to outgrow it. That is much richer than a simple secret informant revelation. This means Shanks is exposed. His bloodline is still active without him, and the world he refused to inherit is still moving pieces around the board. The thematic power of Shanks being a figureland lies in the discomfort it introduces. The reveal forces us to hold two truths together. Shanks is tied by blood to the architecture of oppression. and yet his life has consistently aligned him with freedom, intimacy, and chosen bonds. That tension is exactly why he feels so difficult to categorize. He does not gather mass politics around himself. He makes precise interventions, and remains strategically hard to sort into ally or enemy by the world's institutions. This makes his morality more uncomfortable and more interesting. The association with Figureland Garling gives this bloodline tension a face. Garling is connected to the Holy Knights and to the sacred enforcement of hierarchy, making him a living emblem of the world order Shanks seems to have spent his life orbiting without endorsing. What matters most is not merely that Garling is strong or important. It is that Garling represents the claim of blood over self-definition. If Shanks' whole life has been a refusal of inherited role, then Garling is the possibility that inheritance still demands payment. Every answer Oda gives us raises two more questions. Does Garling see Shanks as betrayal, as loss, or as an asset not yet reclaimed? And does Shanks understand that his silence may be postponing, rather than preventing, a final reckoning with the family he never chose? Anyway, I'll let you guys be the judge of that. If I asked you who wanted to be the freest man of the seas, or who wanted to be the strongest swordsman in the world, you'd be able to answer without a heartbeat. Every central One Piece figure is legible through desire. But Shanks, on the other hand, he is the only character whose ambition remains undefined. He waits, he intervenes, he holds position, he recognizes people, he preserves timing, even when he says he is going after the One Piece. The line lands less like a lifelong ambition finally voiced, and more like a signal that the clock has reached the hour he was waiting for. That is exactly why I like the pillar metaphor so much. A pillar does not announce a dream of its own. It holds up the structure so other movement can occur. Shanks stabilizes eras long enough for the next era to arrive. Restraint in some ways is the point of his character. Shanks works because Oda refuses to explain him too quickly. The mystery is not decorative frosting on top of an already complete character. The mystery is the characterization. A man who says very little, appears rarely, and nevertheless changes the trajectory of the entire manga every time he emerges, is not simply written to be cool. Oda trains the audience to notice consequence before explanation. That is why the Figureland revelation lands so well. It does not replace the older Shanks with a new version. It reveals that the older version always had a deeper reason for being so measured, so quiet, and so selective. Is he a hero, villain, or the final obstacle? One of the most interesting late-stage possibilities in One Piece is that Shanks could oppose Luffy without becoming morally reducible. The strongest form of this theory is not that Shanks has secretly been evil. It is that Shanks may believe in the same end values as Luffy, while profoundly disagreeing about how the world should be allowed to reach them. Luffy's freedom is explosive and seriously unmanaged. It does not negotiate with systems. It blows through them. Shanks, by contrast, has spent an entire lifetime managing thresholds and preserving balances and intervening with almost surgical precision. What does he exactly want? If anyone in the story might believe that even liberation requires stewardship, it would be him. That creates the possibility of a tragic but principled clash. The mentor figure and the inheritor of his faith may want the same dawn, but disagree about whether dawn can be allowed to break all at once. And yet the text also supports a far simpler truth. Shanks has repeatedly protected the conditions required for Luffy's rise. He gave the hat. He carried the fruit. He saved the child. He ended Marineford before the world could take Luffy too. Even his silence can be read less as calculation against Luffy, but more so discipline in service of a future he wants Luffy to reach on his own terms. That is what makes him so well constructed. Both readings are genuinely available without either collapsing into nonsense. Shanks can be protector and future obstacle at once, because the final act of protecting someone may be refusing to decide their world for them. This is probably why Shanks for me is one of the most interesting characters in fiction. I mean, if you think about it, there's not really a character out there that does what he does. And I'm not even trying to glaze him right now. So all in all, every story has a protagonist. One Piece has Luffy, but not every story makes visible the condition that allows the protagonist to exist in the first place. In One Piece, that condition is Shanks. He is there before the adventure even began, carrying Roger's hat, carrying the fruit that will become Nika, and carrying a private burden rooted in the bloodline of the very order the series is trying to dismantle. He gives the dream shape, gives the dreamer a symbol, and repeatedly intervenes, so the world does not collapse before the right generation can challenge it. That is why Shanks is best understood not as a side character, not even as a mentor, but as architecture. He is the support beam Oda kept in shadow for 1,000 chapters, so that when the ceiling finally begins to crack, the reader realizes it was Shanks holding it up all along. The Figureland revelation does not transform Shanks into someone else. It reveals that the man who always seemed deliberate may have been carrying an even greater deliberateness than anyone understood, because every major step of his life has unfolded between two incompatible inheritances: the world that birthed him and the world he chose. If One Piece ends with the old order finally breaking, Shanks may not be remembered as the one who stood at the center of the stage. He may be remembered as the one who made the stage itself possible.